Dragon's Dogma, The Beginning. Written by Ryo Mizuno. Translated to English by Liz of Kutan Cosplay. Narrated by Chainsaw McFacepunch. Chapter 1. This is not your story. It is the story of another arisen. But soon you too will come to know the Dragon's Dogma. Open your eyes. He thought he heard the voice from far away. It was a voice that had called to him many times before. The first time when he was but a non-living wisp of consciousness drifting in the rift. He opened his eyes. A gray sky stretched before his hazy view. In his peripheral vision was the face of a young man with auburn hair. Gray eyes looked down at him, and a slight smile was on his lips. It was the owner of the voice, a man named Savan. Arisen, he sat up, shaking his head. Did I die again? Not to worry, Sald. Savan addressed him by name. You were put to sleep by the Harpy's magic. Sald looked around him. The bloodied bodies of 2 Harpies lay on the ground nearby. These monsters had the body of a bird, but the face and breasts of a woman. They enjoyed the taste of human flesh, and would form flocks to attack passing travelers. Above him, 5 Harpies swooped, shrieking. They were the white-feathered winter breed, known as snow Harpies. Their song possessed the power to put humans to sleep. Cunning as they were, the Harpies had hidden in the deep thickets by the roadside, and began their song the moment Sald passed by. Before he knew it, he had lost consciousness. What a gaffe! Sald bowed his head. To aid their master, the Arisen, and fight without regard for their own life was the duty of those who crossed from the rift, known as pawns. Even if a pawn were to die, the Arisen had the power to bring them back to life. Though they looked identical to humans, the bodies of pawns were comprised of the aura which drifted about the rift. By passing through a riftstone into this world, this aura was transformed into the tangible form of a human. All pawns existed to serve the Arisen. By calling to the rift, the Arisen could summon any pawn. Even if a pawn were to die and its body be destroyed, its consciousness would return to its origin, the rift. If the Arisen summoned them again, they would be revived, their body perfectly restored. Pawns had no reason to fear death. Indeed, as pawns did not feel emotions as keenly as humans, they had difficulty fully understanding the concept of fear. The pawns Savan had chosen to summon were Quince, Morgana, and Sald himself. Sald had lost his life in many battles up to now. It was a source of pride for him, proof that he had defended his master, the Arisen, to the bitter end. But to fall asleep in the middle of a battle was shameful, even if he had been caught off guard. It is no matter, Savan replied, laughing. Now take your sword. They draw near. He tossed Sald's sword to him. Sald caught the hilt in midair and twirled the blade as though it were an extension of his own body. He picked up the shield that lay at his feet and readied it before him. Standing back to back with Savan, Sald scrutinized the sky above. Though the Harpies showed clear signs of aggression, they must have been wary of the 2 fighters, for they did not attack. In that case, Savan muttered to himself. He suddenly dropped his gaze from the Harpies to the ground. At that instant, the Harpies pulled into a dive in unison, aiming straight for Savan's head. Master Savan! Harpies' wings were capable of lifting even an armored soldier with ease. They would then drop their prey to the ground to kill them before consuming their flesh. The Harpies unfurled razor-sharp talons, swooping down to seize Savan. But before those talons could reach him, He crouched low, swinging his sword above his head, and leapt. His body curving back in midair like a bow, he then swung his sword downwards. A snow harpy screamed as it fell to the ground, its wings cleaved from its body. Without a moment's hesitation, Sald sprinted to the harpy and plunged his sword into its chest, delivering the finishing blow. Foul-smelling blood from the wound sprayed onto his face. Savan had made a full turn to land, facing forward, one knee to the ground. Behind him, another harpy was fast approaching. As though he had eyes in the back of his head, he pointed the tip of his sword back, then thrust his sword over his shoulder without even turning around. The gleaming silver blade completely pierced the harpy's throat. Blood spurted and the sound of air escaping issued as the creature expired. Savan pulled the blade free of the harpy and calmly stood. The remaining 3 harpies had descended, but unable to follow Savan's movements, could only flap about in confusion. Seemingly deciding he was unsuitable prey, they began to fly back upwards, screeching as they did so. Sald set after them with all his might. Casting his sword and shield aside, he reached out and with each hand grabbed a harpy by the legs. He was raised aloft for a brief moment before the 2 harpies, wings tangling, lost their momentum. He seized this chance to swing the 2 downwards, so they slammed into the ground. Well done! Savan thrust his sword into the bodies of the 2 harpies, who were now writhing in the dirt. It was a quick death. The last remaining harpy, letting out a sound like a human scream, was flying away at full speed. Sald watched it grow smaller and smaller in the distance, then turned to Savan. It was reckless to drop your guard and invite the beast to attack. We'd get nowhere staring each other down. Besides, those are not faces I care to look at. Savan laughed as he sheathed his sword. Ah, yes, I know the face you prefer, Sald replied seriously, with waves of blonde hair, clear blue eyes. What are you talking about? Savan looked flustered. Sald returned to the matter at hand. Please leave those beasts to me in the future. Such was a pawn's duty to their master. There was no hope of defeating such hardy monsters unless they could pinpoint their weaknesses. The 2 of them had developed their fighting techniques for this purpose. Together, they had defeated such powerful beasts as griffins, hydras, and golems. Still, Master Savan has become strong. Sald studied Savan closely. When he first met his master, Sald had been the stronger one. But through countless battles, Savan had improved at a shocking pace. By now, his skill with a sword far surpassed Sald's. It would be no exaggeration to say Savan was now the greatest warrior of this land. Perhaps he no longer needs my help, Sald mused vaguely. Each time he had such thoughts, he felt a tremor within his heart. Could this be that emotion called fear? With a start, Sald noticed that Savan was gazing intently at a rust-colored mountain in the distance. It was said that the mountain had once been a grand volcano. Over 1,000 years ago, a massive eruption had blasted the top of the mountain away, leaving a vast crater devoid of life. The ruler of the region at the time, taking advantage of the natural defenses of this crater, had erected a sturdy fortress there. But hardly 100 years from its construction, the dragon chose the same area as its den. The castle fell into ruin, abandoned by the ruler and his people. The Tainted Mountain, it was called now. No one dared approach. The air of this once lush region was now polluted with the miasma of the dragon, and the other magical beasts who dwelled here. The trees of the forest they had traversed on their way here had become withered, and were bent into distorted shapes. Just a bit farther, Sald called to Savan. Indeed. Savan turned and nodded. Then, as if in prayer, he brought his hand to his chest, over the large scar there. It was the scar left when the dragon had gouged out his heart in their first encounter. Savan had been a knight serving under God King Leonard. Amid the other knights clamoring to escape, he alone had faced the dragon. It had swallowed Savan's heart. "I claim my prize," its voice boomed. "If you would have it back, defeat me in battle." With that, Savan became arisen. And arisen was one who had their heart stolen, one who was fated to defeat the dragon. Savan continued to fight in pursuit of reclaiming his heart. Since Savan had become arisen, he had not only trained physically, but collected any writings and legends he could find relating to the dragon, searching for any way he could defeat such a tremendous beast. But the more he trained, the more he became aware of his own weakness. The more he researched, the more he was convinced that it was folly to try to fight the dragon. And yet, Sald thought, Master Savan has come so far. Perhaps he truly can defeat it. Everyone knew such a feat was impossible for an ordinary human. In all history, there was only one who had succeeded, the God King who Savan served, Leonard. Leonard had become arisen 50 years earlier, when his heart was taken by the dragon. At the time a mere lord, he had called on the nobles of the region and enacted the worm hunt. In the end, he succeeded not only in slaying the dragon alone, but in driving it away each time it was reborn. Thus, Leonard earned his position as the God King, ruler of the entire continent. After imploring Leonard, Savan had been granted a royal order to slay the dragon. If he could do so, peace would return to the land. At least for the fleeting years or months until the next dragon arrived. Dragons were born, brought destruction upon the world till their dying breath, and were born again in an endless cycle. This was the absolute dogma this world had known for eternity. The fight against the dragon would continue forever. Sald believed that the sworn fighters known as pawns existed for this very reason. Savan was still gazing towards the dragon's lair. Sald turned to follow his gaze, but suddenly noticed wisps of white smoke rising from a crag to the west. He narrowed his eyes. This region should be uninhabited. Still, the smoke did not look like it came from a wildfire. "What is it?" Savan had noticed the look on Sald's face. "Over there." Sald pointed at the source of the smoke. Savan's gaze hardened as he turned to look. "Come, Sald," he shouted, breaking into a run. Sald hurriedly shouldered his pack and followed.